Hello again. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Andre. In today's video, it's going to be something very different from what I've done so far on this channel. And as the title of the video says, it's Artist and Activism. So what do I mean by that? What I'm want to talk about really is how activism has changed from my point of view in the last 25 years, and how artists use activism than what they did before. So that's the main this is the main topic of the video. The point of the video is not to be political or anything. It's just my observations, what I've observed over the past 25 years, and giving my commentary to it. So this is going to be something very different. So the video is going to be in roughly 3 parts, talking first about artists in general and their social commentary when they do, and then about activism, and then finally a little bit about intersectionality, because that is a big part of activism now in certain aspects. And then finally I will give you my conclusion and thoughts on all of this. So that's that. So let's get cracking. I think it's easy to say that whatever you consume of the arts, whether it's music, film, TV, books, comic books, whatever it is, that there is always in the stories you hear some form of social commentary within them. That's just the nature of it, and that has always existed in everything, throughout basically human history. The stories fairy tales we've been told over the years, something like right now, for example, the Odyssey has certain, even though it's a mythological tale, it has social commentary about heroism and so forth. And that's and for me personally, that's always been what's made some stories interesting, like the Lord of the Rings. Again, a fantasy tale, but has a lot of commentary basically about heroism and so forth in it. So that's nothing new. And in music, the same way, that musicians talk about things they experience. So there's always some level of social commentary within it. And for me personally, the first time I remember being aware of some sort of social commentary in a song was back in 1984, when Bruce Springsteen released his album Born in the USA, and the title track of that, of course. Because if you listen to the song or know the song, it's a very upbeat tempo song that is almost an anthemic in certain way, because of the repeating lyrics of Born in the USA. But if you actually read the lyrics, it's actually a rather, I wouldn't say harsh critique of America and at the time, and particularly about Vietnam and the veterans that came home after the war. So that was one of the, I remember, songs I heard where there was some sort of critique of, or some commentary about a social issue, because at that time I was 8 years old and seeing the videos first time, and I came sort of aware it. Another band who also writes songs with social content is U2, for example. Is also one of the bands back in the 80s that I remember doing social commentary. with, for example, songs like Sunday Bloody Sunday, which of course is about the Derry massacre in Ireland. So these things have already seen, but those are two like things I remember rather clearly from my childhood. And then up into the 90s, we more again one other band, for example, that I recall that was, I would say, is a political band, is Rage Against the Machine, when they released their first solo album or their first album in '92, self-titled, which was very controversial at the time because of, again, the messaging and the social commentary and so forth. And there are many other examples there, but just those three right now are the ones that, when I thought of this video, and I've been thinking about this video for the past 2 weeks, that have come to mind throughout my life. They're like big things. With me personally, with Rage Against the Machine, is that particularly the guitar player Tom Morello is a political activist. He has been a political activist basically since his high school days, and I think he describes himself as either a socialist or a social democrat, which is fine. That's his political beliefs. I just think he is personally, and this is my critique of him, is that he's a walking contradiction in many ways. He talks about power to the people and all that and sticking it to the man. It has always seemed though that capitalism is evil and everything, and he is in his own right to believe that. But I find it funny that his band decided to release their records on Epic, owned by Sony, in '92, and basically I think all their records were released on Epic. Somehow that you're willing to do that sort of compromise for your views, and I can maybe understand and say that we compromise here because we can reach more people if we sign to a big label. That's that. But are you not compromising at that point one of your basic principles? So that's just my short commentary on that. So and one of the other big things, of course, this is not so much music, but more going into to film and particularly documentaries, is of course a big activist director is Michael Moore, with his, for example, his Voting for Columbine, which was again a critique of the gun culture in the United States, more or less, and talking about the Columbine incident, which of course won him an Oscar in 2002-3, where he gave his speech because he was vehemently against the Iraq war that had started up, the second one, of course, based on, of course, that the United States decided that it needed to act, basically, again, revenge on the people who performed 9/11 in 2001. And he gave that speech at the Oscars, and he went so far that his follow-up movie, which is called Fahrenheit 9/11, that is him trying to dissect, as he does in his movies, that the reason for going to war was based on very, very thin or lies, more or less. And he went so far, if you can remember, that because the movie comes out in 2004, just before the elections, the 2004 elections. And he decides to say, well, I'm not interested in being nominated for an Academy Award, so he puts the movie Fahrenheit 9/11 on TV on the night before, I think. So people can watch it the day before the elections in hope of maybe shifting the vote. So this is clearly political activism on his part. And that's one of the things. There's one other big thing is, of course, in 2006, the former vice president, of course, Al Gore, releases a documentary which he narrates, and it's of course an inconvenient truth about the climate change that's happening on our planet, of course. And the documentary is in halfway a lecture he gives based on the book he released, and that resulted in he won a Grammy for the audiobook, I think, a Golden Globe, an Academy Award, and then finally he shared the Nobel Prize with the UN climate panel that year in 2007, or 6 or 7 as well. So this is again also one of those big, and for me personally, a highly contentious film, because it is, I wouldn't say that the movie is based on lies, but it exaggerates a lot of things. One of the big things, and going into this, is that he makes the claim that Kilimanjaro, the mountain, would have no snow on it after 25 years, and we are almost 25 years after, and it's in the movie set in such a way that is almost 100% certain, even though there's no evidence for that it will happen, and it didn't. Kilimanjaro still has snow on it, so it's again these political things that happened. And one other thing that is mentioned in the movie is, of course, that he claims, again, it's a claim, that the seas would rise 100 feet if the poles, North and South Pole, would melt. At that point, even within the UN climate panel, their reports never mentioned that number. It was some sort of, again, exaggeration to make it seem like it's worse than it actually is, because at that time the highest number I heard was 10 feet. I think that was the biggest number I ever saw in any written from any of those reports or anything similar. So exaggeration has come in to activism. Maybe it has always been there, but it has become a very heavy part of it. And finally, one of the last big inflection points I remember, which is about 8 years ago, is Greta Thunberg, who is not an artist in any way, but is very much an activist, and is probably one of my personally feelings on her is one of the worst activists that have yet come out. I understand that she's passionate about her things, but again, at that time, what would it be? A 15-year-old girl is allowed to speak in front of the UN and then lecture them about the state of the planet And how dare you is, of course, the popular phrase from her when she said, a girl with Asperger's also, you can tell. I remember seeing her saying, oh, she has some sort of, with how she behaves. From Sweden, talking about how terrible they are and everything. So that's that. I've already gone very political, but let me just go a few steps back. Social commentary in media or in the arts in general has always been a thing, like I said at the very beginning of this video. And it's great because it makes you think about things, your place in the world, and whatever it invokes something in you. Activism is the next step of that, where you call to some sort of action, of course. And that has, again, with the examples I've given before, has existed for decades. And they have taken many, many forms, of course, those actions. Sadly, some very violent, some non-violent, and so forth. And what I have discovered, or at least my observations over the past 25 years, is that the foundation of a lot of activism from people, both within the arts in general now, is that it is, for me, what I see, based on obfuscation, lying, and then claiming at the same time that the opposition is the evil one, but you are the one true. Basically, you're the one with the solution, so forth. And prior to that, I don't remember activism being that was the foundation. You are, again, what I'm trying to say here, poorly, of course, you are building your foundation of your activism and your change, whatever it may be, on quicksand. And because we now live in an interconnected world with the internet, where activism also has become very simplistic. Oh, it's a like. Oh, it's a click. It's going to change.org or something like that means something. Like that changes the world, and people think they do something. It's, to me, just bizarre, as someone who has lived some years without the internet and remembers how the world was before. And now we are in a world where we at the same time have access to so much information, but it seems like at the same time people don't know anything at all. You hear the phrase, or just Google it. The problem is now with just Google it is how the internet works now here in 2026. If whoever's watching, is that now if you type anything into Google or even some of the other search engines, Bing, for example, is you get what they call an AI summary of some websites, and people just read that stuff. You can see podcasts that do that stuff, or use Grok if you're on X, for example, to do those summaries, and then take it as truth or even as somewhat objective. Because if you know a little bit of how these AI models work, whether it's Grok, Gemini, or ChatGPT, is that they are not objective if you actually start poking at them with questions, and then because one of the problems is, of course, is what data they are trained on. And what you learn, most of them, the largest data sets, they are all, I think all three of them are trained on is Reddit and Wikipedia. Reddit is a highly, highly political place, highly progressive in its views. And you can go on basically any subreddit and you will clearly, very quickly feel that no matter what the subject matter you're looking at is, there is always some sort of progressive worldview there. That's just my observation again. Wikipedia has been, of course, accused for the last 10 years of not being objective. And you can see that if you actually start looking at certain pages, who changes them and how often they're changed. One was, of course, last year with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, for example. You could, in almost real time, see how the Wikipedia, his Wikipedia page changed, being filled with things that were not true, then being corrected, and so forth. There was basically, and it's been described by people later on as more or less a war going on. So again, you are training these models on things that are supposed to be giving you truthful information, and yet they're the chances it's giving you biased information, of some sort, because the AI has built-in bias because of who built it and the data it's trained on. I guess that's the point I'm getting at. And so it becomes hard if you say educate yourself, Google it, is that now you have to get past that AI summary and start to look deeper. And most people don't do that. And I'm not saying if you don't do that, that you're a bad person or uninformed, but it becomes harder. That step, that extra step that has come in the past few years is, I think, detrimental to finding information on the internet, because it just gives you the summary. Again, if you use X, you can just ask Grok, and if you look at on X, for example, just to take one social network, is that when somebody posts something, whatever it is, and it blows up on X, you can clearly see in the comment section or in the replies, always the same, Grok, is this true? Always somebody asks Grok whether it, and it's like, again, what truth do you think this thing will give you? Because again, it is trained on things that, not false information, but again, biased information. And again, I rarely use ChatGPT or Grok or anything, because the way it answers, it has a way of answering that you can tell, again, there's a worldview within and again, so it's highly dubious to me. It's a great tool at the end, and that's again one of the things, of course, in the arts right now, whether it's music, movies, is that the fear is now that this tool, AI in general, is gonna eat the arts completely, because now I can make AI movies, I can make this, I can make that, I can make AI music, and so forth. So artists will at the end become irrelevant. I don't think so, because the art is about the human experience, and an AI, a collection of data, cannot. That is maybe human history, but it's not the human experience, what it means to be human, and how to convey something you experience. That I don't think that it will ever be possible to do that. I might be wrong, but that's for another. But that's, again, the change in activism is that, like I said earlier, building your, that you want to invoke change, whether it's political, environmental, or whatever, on quicksand and lecturing. And that's really what I'm trying to get at, is that artists have become parrots over the past 25 years, particularly since the arrival of social media, whether it's Facebook as one of the first big ones, and now Instagram and so forth. Artists parroting whatever they're being told sometimes, and worst of all, lecturing their audience to what's right and what's wrong. And if you're not on their level or side, so to speak, then stay away. As I remember, was 2 years ago, I saw Bruce Springsteen. I think it was 2 years ago. He came to my town, and of course he got on his, let's say, high horse and gave his, like he has done now for the past few years, his anti-Trump speech, and he can do that for all I care. If he doesn't like the current president of the United States, that's fine. He is in its right to do that, but don't lecture your audience, because and that's another point that I think a lot of artists have forgotten, and content creators, the new age of artists, so to speak. You don't choose your audience. You never have. The audience chooses you because you put something out for public consumption and critique that resonated with people in some way. And that has then given you what the small percentage, a career. And a lot of artists have forgotten that, I think. This lecturing of not always lecturing, but trying to indoctrinate their audience into thinking the same thing as them. Your audience can think for themselves. They're not stupid. Hopefully you don't think that your audience is stupid. What does that say about you then? If they're only here to listen to you because they're stupid, what does that in the end really tell about you as a human being? I don't think that's flattering at the end. And that's where I want to quickly go back to Rage Against the Machine. Rage Against the Machine was, again, anti-establishment and everything, and now particularly Tom Morello, because the Rage Against the Machine has more or less deceased. He's doing, of course, his Night Watchman, which is even more political, and then his solo stuff and everything. He played, for example, here at the UK Download Festival, I think, and on the back of his guitar, he showed "Fuck Tommy Robinson." And for those who don't know, Tommy Robinson is a political activist hooligan in the UK who speaks a lot about Islam and his anti-views against, again, he's not a fan of Islam and the UK rape gangs and so forth. You can look more into that if you like, but that's him. And it's this divisiveness that a foreigner comes, he's an American, Tom Morello, and again, Harvard graduate, again, man of the people, as they say, lecturing again people about how they should feel about another person. He can dislike Tommy Robinson, of course, but it's an echo chamber. that talks to another echo chamber, and it's just laughable. And it's again this very, very strange of convincing people something is wrong in the world, and if you don't agree with them, well, then you are just a problem. And that's insane. That's an insane position to have, I think. There are a lot of things I dislike about things that have happened in my country and so forth, but wishing almost the death of other people and then thinking you are the one true righteous person, that is a human flaw of cataclysmic sizes, if you really think that. So I don't know, it's strange. Well, one more thing, one other thing is that I mentioned Al Gore, of course, and how he got glazed for his for the film Inconvenient Truth. Of course, he didn't direct; he just started, but it was based on his book. One thing that I really, again, is that he got glazed by Hollywood, of course. But that's why he won the Academy Award, even though he isn't the director or anything, but he won it because, again, Hollywood, again, is one of those particularly also one of those where activism has become very prominent in the past 10 years. That he got the Academy Award for the documentary and so forth. And then again, he wins the Nobel Peace Prize, which he shares with the UN climate panel. I think he only technically is sharing a third of it, and they got 2/3, if I remember correctly. But one interesting thing that happened at that time, and again, I'm a physicist, while not the physics I've done has nothing really to do with climate. I had my postdoc work was within natural gas, and certain things were around natural gas, and that was at the Technical University in Denmark, in Lyngby, where I did for 2.5 years roughly, did my work. At that university around that time in 2006-07, there was a group of physicists that had looked into climate change, and what they focused on is that the movie Inconvenient Truth basically postulates that the climate change and the rise in temperature is more or less solely caused by human beings. And there's still debate with whether we are the sole responsible of that, the rise in temperature and so forth, and the change in climate in general over the past 50 years, just to name a time frame. What they looked at was to see does the position of Earth in relation to the sun, and the sun's position in relation to the solar system, and our solar system's position in terms of where it is in the galaxy, does that have any influence on our climate? It was believed for many years before that there is some part of that that influences the climate in general because of solar winds and so forth, but that effect was always believed to be negligible, very, very small. what they showed in their papers, if I remember correctly, is that that effect is much larger and cannot be discarded, or meaning you can say rounded out, so to speak. And I remember clearly when that paper, though I think they published 1 or 2 papers about it, they got death threats, they got criticized by other climate people saying this is basically dog shit. Remove that. And again, you are again building your foundation of your activism, so to speak, on lies. And then you at the same time you want to sit there as the one who's truthful and honest. It's in the end, it's the king who has no clothes on. That is what it is. And again, I want to reiterate that seems to have become the foundation of activism now, especially in the last 10 years, I think. And when you hear musicians or actors or whatever, authors talk ad nauseum about this and that, like they're expert on it when they aren't. And I'm not saying they can't voice their opinions. I absolutely believe they should be. They should voice their opinion, but don't talk down to your audience. That's really it. You are in no position to do that. You are not the arbiter of truth or anything. Again, you are a human being with a certain amount of information about a topic that you are passionate about, and that's great at the end of the day. But to demonize anyone who doesn't agree with you or has a different view on it, or even might know something other about the topic, and dismiss it is, and again, social media has very much deglamorized artists in general. That's another thing, because now we have access to artists 24/7 if they have an Instagram account, X account, Facebook, or whatever it is, Threads, whatever it is, that you can talk to them directly, more or less. They are not as exclusive as they were pre-social media or pre-internet, where the only contact you had with artists were if you saw them in a movie or whatever, or at a concert or whatever it was, or in a magazine, in an interview, where everything is more you saw them in a very controlled environment. And now with social media, they are more or less out in the wild. And what people, of course, have discovered, that these are not powerhouses of knowledge, to be frank. Really, some of them may be, but again, taking someone as Robert De Niro, who screams like a child about his dismay of the current American president, fine by me if he wants to, but this is one of the greatest actors of the past 50 years. And he just, look, when I see him and hear him talk, that's Grandpa Simpson talking, old man screaming at clouds. He's literally that meme, so to speak. At least to me. You, dear viewer, may have a different opinion, and you are in your full right to have that. But that is also one of the changes that has happened because activism, a good way to get through with activism, of course, is through the arts. Because so many, it's culture. It's very important for it. It's the identity of a lot of people. So go using activism through the arts is a clever thing. But again, when you start to base it on falsehoods or exaggerations or obfuscation by pointing and saying, those people over there are the bad ones and I am the good one, believe me. And again, someone as Greta Thunberg, to getting back to her not being an artist, is the epitome of that to me. I remember seeing it, and it wasn't an interview where she sits with some of her friends and she more or less admits that she doesn't, not lying, but exaggerates in order to get, like what I'm trying to say here, to me, she seems like one, the means justifies the end, meaning lying, obfuscating, blah, blah, blah. All those things are okay as long as I get my way. That is, again, that is an idealist that you are to basically dealing with. Other idealists are Pol Pot, Lenin, Stalin. I'm not saying that she's on that level in any way, but the trade is there. And when you see her, she's always surrounded by people, because again, she has Asperger's, and you can tell she doesn't respond very well to social cues and that. And now, in the past, what is it, 3 years now, since the October 7th incident, has pivoted away from environment to now Israel. And she's again in her right to do that if that's what she's passionate about. Okay. But when you again build your things on lies or claiming other people lie and then yourself don't come off as truthful, it is hard to at least for me personally, take people like that serious and activism of that kind serious, because I like to think I can think for myself, and I hope you, dear viewer, also can think for yourself. I am certain you can at the end of the day. You don't need someone to tell you what to think and feel. At the end, you are your own person, and should be able to arrive at a conclusion to what you should think about a topic or whatever, a social topic or whatever it may be. It shouldn't be, nobody should yell at you for what that is. At least that's my belief. So, like I mentioned in the very beginning, I wanted to talk, one of the things that has happened to activism in general is intersectionality. And I will show the definition of intersectionality now. And it's, of course, about how things intersect with whatever topic, and intersectionality focuses on race, gender, and marginalized people of color, usually because of its author. And I'll state this very clearly: intersectionality is one of the worst things that has happened to activism in general. It dilutes activism of any kind. All of a sudden, you have a topic you are passionate about and you're trying to invoke change, but you have to suddenly analyze it from gender, race, marginalized people perspective, women of color, or whatever it is. It's like you get nowhere suddenly. I remember back in 2020, right after the lockdowns happened here in Denmark. They happened in the middle of March. So people were, of course, stuck at home, and I was watching some YouTube videos on veganism at that time because I liked the debate topics they had. And of course, when we reached the summer of 2020 was, of course, the reaction to the murder of, or the death of George Floyd. And all of a sudden, at least within veganism, in the online space, all of a sudden intersectionality came in. Or if you're vegan, you have to talk about Black people. You have to do this. You have to do that. Intersectionality suddenly grabbed in certain online spaces. There, it's really hard around, and other places as well. And it just choked everything. It's truly one of the worst things that can happen to activism, really, because the purity of your message that it is, then if your message has nothing to do with these things, but the belief of the author of Intersectionality is that there's always some intersection of those things, and I can, on a surface level, agree with that. But when you make it your main focus, your foundation crumbles within seconds. You cannot achieve anything. And you can see with the for example, with the summer of 2020, you had the reaction to the George Floyd incident, and you had what's now commonly known as the Summer of Love around many cities in the US, for example, Portland, in Oregon, and so forth. And that was a political move in activism. And it turns out that Black Lives Matter, or BLM as its acronym, was based on mostly lies. Maybe the grassroots movement of it still was trying to achieve something, but the people behind it were just taking millions and millions of dollars and spending them on houses and so forth. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but again, the intersectionality is really one of the worst things that has happened to activism in general, because again, it dilutes everything. And my personal belief is it almost everything comes to a halt when you take those things into account. So I'm very much against stuff like that. That when you start to include other things in your political movement or your activism, that the pureness of what you are trying to achieve cannot be achieved anymore. And that's really the end of my spiel here. So thank you for listening. I hope it's been somewhat informative, and I hope to see you in the next one.